Welcome everyone to a new episode of Biology. Today we'll talk about Mendel and heredity. Mendel and heredity. So the key concept here is Mendel's research showed that traits are inherited as discrete units. We will study what are traits and what is the meaning of discrete units. The main ideas, number one, Mendel laid the groundwork for genetics. The second one, Mendel's data revealed the patterns of inheritance. So let's start by the first one. When we think of how offspring resemble or differ from each other or their parents, we typically refer to specific traits which means the characteristics. Traits are distinguishing characteristics that are inherited such as the eye color, the leaf shape, and the tail length. So they apply for both plants and animals. Scientists recognized that the traits are hereditary, means passed from one generation to the next, long before they understood how traits are passed on. Then we come to the term genetics. This is the study of biological inheritance patterns and the variation in organisms. Genetics is the study of biological inheritance patterns and the variation in organisms. The groundwork for much of our understanding of genetics was established in the middle of the 1800s by an Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel is called the father of genetics because he is the one who discovered the hereditary units. Scientists of that time thought that parents' traits were blended in the offspring, like mixing red and white paint in order to get pink paint. But this idea failed to explain how certain traits remained without being diluted or changed. Mendel, who is a shrewd mathematician, bred thousands of plants, carefully counting and recording his results. From Mendel's data, he correctly predicted the results of meiosis long before chromosomes were discovered. Can you imagine that? Mendel recognized that the traits are inherited as discrete units from the parental generation, like different colored marbles. They are mixed together, yet can be still picked out separately. So Mendel said that, or he recognized that the traits are inherited as separate units from the parents or the parental generation, like the different colored marbles that are mixed together, but that can be still be picked out separately. By recognizing that organisms inherit two copies of each discrete unit, what, what we now call genes, Mendel also described how traits were passed between generations. By recognizing that the traits are inherited as discrete units, organisms inherit two copies of each discrete unit. We will know further that these two copies, one from the father and the other from the mother, what we now call genes. These are the discrete units. Mendel also described how the traits were passed between generations, how this process takes place. Mendel studied plant variation in a monastery garden where he lived. Mendel made three key choices about his experiments that played an important role in the development of his laws of inheritance. These, these three key choices are control over breeding, two, use the purebred plants, and we will study what is this, then observation of either or traits. These traits are either or, yes or no, white or purple, rounded or shrinkled, for example, that appeared in only two alternate forms. The experimental design. Mendel chose pea plants for his experiment. Why? Why specifically the pea plants? Because they reproduce quickly and Mendel could easily control how they mate. Now we need to know the parts of the flower, only the male and the female reproductive organs of a flower. In the middle here, as you can see, this part, all this part and this swollen part on the bottom, this is called the pistil or the female reproductive organ. Pistil or the female reproductive organ. And also, as you can see here, this swollen part and this long thread, this is called stamen or the male reproductive organ in flowers, the stamens. So stamens are the male reproductive organs and the pistils are the female reproductive organs. Then what about self-pollination and cross-pollination? Pollination is the process of transferring the pollen grains or the male reproductive cells or the male sex cells in plants to the female reproductive organs. So transferring pollen grains from pistils, from stamens to pistils. Transferring pollen grains from the stamens to the pistils. We have two types of pollination: self-pollination and cross-pollination. Look at the first plant to the left. This is a plant that have both the reproductive organs, the male and female. In this case, the pollen grains, as you can see, they are transferred from the stamens to the pistil of the same flower. But cross-pollination means the pollen grains are transferred from one plant to another, from one flower to another in a different plant. As you can see, this bee acts as a pollinator who carries the pollen grains to the pistils of the second flower. Okay, let's continue. The sex organs of a plant are in its flowers for sure. A pea and pea plant or pea flowers contain both male and female reproductive organs. The sex organs of plants are in the flowers. The pea plant flowers, it contains both male and female reproductive organs. In nature, the pea flower typically self-pollinates. As we agreed, this is the self-pollination. That is, the plant mates with itself. If a line of plants has self-pollinated for long enough or for long period of time, that line becomes genetically uniform or purebred. So if a plant has self-pollinated itself for long enough, that line becomes genetically uniform. This is called purebred. As a result, the offspring of purebred plants inherit all of the parent organism's characteristics. The offspring of a purebred parents, it inherits all the characteristics of the parent organism. Mendel was able to mate plants with specific traits by interrupting the self-pollination process. So Mendel controlled the specific traits by interrupting the self-pollination process. Actually, Mendel removed the male parts of a flower, which are the stamens, and fertilized the female parts with pollen that contained sperm cells from different plants. Mendel knew that any variation in offspring resulted from his experiments because he started with purebred plants. So what did he did? Mendel controlled the fertilization of his pea plants by removing the male parts or the stamens, as you can see from the picture, and then he fertilized the female part on this brush. It contains or it holds on the pollen grains of another plant. So Mendel then fertilized the female part or pistil with pollen from a different pea plant. What are the results of this experiment? In genetics, the mating of two organisms is called a cross. So the word cross or the term cross means mating of two organisms in genetics. An example of one of Mendel's crosses is highlighted next. In this example, he crossed a purebred white flower pea plant with a purebred purple flower pea plant. Let's see. These plants are the parental generation or P generation, P for parental generation. The resulting offspring, they are called the first filial or F1 generation, all had purple flowers. So the trait for white flowers seemed to disappear. It did not appear in the first generation or the first filial. When Mendel allowed the F1 generation, which were all purple, to self-fertilize, the resulting F2 generation produced both plants with purple flowers and plants with white flower. So the trait for the white flower did not disappear. It had been hidden or masked. As you can see, this is a purebred white and purebred plants were crossed to create F1. In F1, all the offspring were purple. Then offspring were allowed to self-pollinate to create F2 or filial tube generation. So the result is white flowers appear in some offspring. The ratio is 3 to 1 or 3 quarters to 1 quarter. Mendel did not cross only two plants, however, he crossed many plants to make sure of the results. As a result, Mendel was able to observe patterns. Mendel noticed that each cross yielded similar ratios in the F2 generation, which are about 3/4 of the plants had purple flowers and about 1/4 had white flowers. So the term ratio means a comparison that tells how two or more things relate to each other. This ratio can be expressed as 3 to 1 of purple to white flowers. As you can see in the next table, Mendel's data show that this approximately 3 to 1 ratio for each of his crosses. Look, these are crosses for different traits like the pea shape, whether it is round or wrinkled, pea color, yellow or green, flower color, purple or white, pod shape and pod color, flower position, and the plant height. All of them give the ratio 3 to 1, approximately 3 to 1. So what is the conclusion of this? From these observations, Mendel drew three important conclusions. Mendel demonstrated that traits are inherited as discrete units, which provided an explanation for individual traits that persisted without being blended or diluted over successive generations, like the purple color. Also, Mendel's two other key conclusions are collectively called the law of segregation. The law of segregation, or Mendel's first law. This is very important. Organisms inherit two copies of each gene, one from each parent, and organisms donate only one copy of each gene in their gametes. So, the two copies of each gene segregate or separate during the gamete formation, and this is what we studied in the process of meiosis. Hope you understood this session. See you in the next one. Thank you guys and goodbye.